So this is Appliance Sys, and you can see here that we're a global company in terms of our reach. However, specific to this conversation, we've been building a caching appliance as one of our core products for 15 years, and it's been developed specifically for schools for over a decade. That's really, really important because all the other cache solutions on the market, as far as dedicated cache solutions, are not for schools. That's usually something for enterprise. So ours is built for school traffics to fit in school networks and to perform well with school traffic. And for those reasons, CacheBox has been the most widely selected solution so far on E-Rate. When it was added in 2015, we've done over half the requests have gone to us. So when a school district is requesting funding to purchase caching, half the time they do, it's for ours because of the reasons that I mentioned. And so what we want to look at is, some information. The benefit of a cache depends on understanding the situation for modern school networks, looking beyond upgrades as a solution for the best ROI, and what are some operational dynamics that are important for schools to understand and why a cache works. Quickly, though, just on modern schools, the profile has changed significantly in a short amount of time. And everything has been really built around device proliferation. For most schools in the United States, around 2012, there was a big shift to state testing being digital. And so schools got a lot of funding to buy, a fixed amount of devices so that they could do this testing. And, the devices didn't go away when testing closed. They kind of stuck around, and during the rest of the following school years, they were used. And what happened is we saw over time this really large peak. At the same time, devices were getting much cheaper with Chromebooks and even low-cost PCs. And because there were so many devices, content developers, Pearson, McGraw-Hill, started building more and more online textbooks as opposed to regular text. Schools started purchasing more curriculum that was web-based, and now everything's mostly web-based. And so there's a big shift in schools needing to have high-performing networks. What I mean by this is that in the classroom, because we have, entire curriculum platforms and testing that are based on web-based platforms, if the internet if there's any blips, any hiccups, we've got loading issues and user wait time, which affects learning outcomes rather than just being annoying. Teachers are frustrated. They don't want to use the technology, which has an impact on professional dollars that are spent. So there's a classroom impact, and there's all built on this kind of device growth. And then there's kind of the network impact in that we've got a lot more hardware and networks and a lot more complex setups, or just bigger setups, and a lot more devices to service and support. But school teams are largely the same number. So we've got this demand that's outpacing support, so that anything that we can do to kind of stabilize the end user experience is going to mean less kind of support ticket requests and more time for school network teams to kind of do the hard work that really matters. And then finally, bandwidth does not equal speed. So what we find out with the largest school districts that we work with is that once you're past congestion, right, once you upgrade from a 2 gig pipe to a 10 gig pipe, it seems faster because you were struggling with congestion. But once you're past that, you cannot make the internet come in faster. It depends on things like geography and the quality of the connection from where the request is coming from, and the server capability that's hosting that request. If a bunch of other schools are also requesting content from Scholastic, maybe they've got some slowdowns at the retrieval level. And then finally, for whatever schools are going to come into, big factors, because we are talking public K-12 education here, cost and security are huge, important things. And because we work with so many school districts across the U.S., if you're not strong on both when it comes to network hardware, you do not have a stake in the game. We obviously do, because we do well on both sides of that important coin. Okay, so let's look at the bandwidth story as it applies to caching. This is ISP traffic, right? This is from an internet service provider. And if I back up a second here, let's see that again. The people get up, they go to work, they get online, they come home, right? This is just normal community traffic or office traffic. And the difference between the peaks and the troughs aren't that high. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing online to get after whatever their jobs require. And so if you put in a cache, maybe you'll get a drop down to the blue line, but the peak overall gain isn't that much. But schools are different. School traffic looks like this. If you imagine back in when you were in school, you'd have a bunch of students doing the same thing. They might open up a textbook and go to a certain page. They might get out their papers and take notes, or they might all go start a lab activity, or they might do a worksheet with their partner. But largely in schools, for the better part of a century, we've got a bunch of users doing the same thing. And when you combine that with internet access, schools are now seeing huge spikes in demand compared to what their average internet demand looks like. Because nowadays, a bunch of, the teacher says, here's what we're doing today. Now everybody start your lesson, and they all start with a YouTube video. And so you've got 30 requests going out to the internet for the same thing. Or you've got, doubled, tripled the amount of devices in the past 2 years, and now you've got a bunch of machines asking for a software update. Now, whatever it is, schools have huge peaks, and this is where a cache fits. Back in the early 2000s, schools are using caches because their high schools had like 5 meg connections. But now it's helpful so that schools can manage the impact of their peak demand. You really want to reduce the red. And this is why the FCC invited caching into Category 2 in 2015, because they're the ones footing the bandwidth bills, and we want to avoid, schools spending 100% of their dollars on a 20% problem. So it's a combined strategy to help manage growth, manage peak demand, and how you do that is possible by having the right cache. And this is one side of that. A lot of caches on the market might be specific to a certain thing. This is a server that we buy to run our testing. This is a server that we purchase to do our Apple updates. This is a Windows server that we do our window updates. But the fact is, schools are not uniform. There are a range of types of devices and a range of types of requests. So that's why I use the term the right cache. A cache that can perform well in school needs to be able to respond to whatever school district purchasing demands, right? Maybe next year PCs come out at half the price and schools buy a bunch of those. Or maybe you get a new superintendent who's crazy about Apple, so we start buying iPads. No matter the changes, it needs to be able to work with everything, because on top of that, people are bringing guest network devices all the time from home. So on the update side, which is a huge part of school traffic, the right cache needs to be versatile in what it can respond to, in addition to YouTube and Spotify and so forth. Here's what you can expect. This is a 1,200 student district in Texas, or sorry, a 2,500 student district on a 1 gig network. They also have an additional 800 guest network devices every day, and our reporting shows what the cache box is doing for them. You see this transmit max compared to what's left over from the internet. So instead of having these huge peaks, and maybe this tech director sees that if they look on their firewall, they'd hit 930 megs that day, that's in a threat area. But instead, this person's seeing 300, 400, 500 megs down here. And that's what we want the cache to do. We want to help manage their current connection to keep them there as long as they can, and help them delay the next upgrade by reducing peak demand. Again, this is all repeat requests, and that's what the cache wants to do well. It's about caching peak repeat requests. And that's from the district level, but sometimes, like Akron City in Ohio, their connections out to the schools is another cost that they have to pay. So even if they have plenty of bandwidth, maybe a point-to-point connection is small. So this high school is on a 250 meg connection, and it's really expensive to increase the connections going out to the buildings. So you can see how a cache can let them exceed that for when the time comes. Instead of paying for all the time bandwidth to manage this, maybe doubling it to 500 would handle a lot of part of it. Instead, put a cache in just to manage those peaks. So it can be local, or it could be a cache in an individual school site if connecting those point-to-point connections is expensive. No matter where you're at, by delaying upgrades, we can also offset these associated projects. So if I always ask, well, what's it going to cost if you go beyond 10 gigs? What would you have to do? Oh, there would be something. What would it cost if you were to increase beyond a gig? Or if all your schools are on 100 megabit connections locally, what's it cost to increase to 500? Because we don't think about this. You think about only paying for the ISP cost, but reality, there's costs on updating your hardware as well. And it's also the time to do those upgrades is another big expensive cost for technology teams that are already stretched. The next part is that caching accelerates requests to local speeds. And for our reporting also shows how for every school, there's always some ceiling. We can see the CacheBox will report the speed of the cache miss, requests that aren't cached, and compare that to the speed of all the requests from the cache hit. And every school on the cache miss side has some ceiling where nothing comes in faster. And that's because you can't buy speed. Again, once you're past congestion, you can't make things come in faster. But a cache is going to record and serve things locally. So you can see the cache cluster, without a doubt, on every report that we see is always exceeding the network ceiling. And that's the biggest reason large school districts are implementing a cache, is because they want to speed up performance, because the bandwidth isn't going to be that expensive, but there's a need to make sure that things are coming in as fast as possible. And also just in general future-proofing against oncoming growth. And so what this looks like, this is a big impact in the classroom. It's nice that an Apple update's going to, clear the LAN, at 3 times the speed. But because this is built for schools, we can cache some of this is example of cache content that we're going to, Pearson testing, Edpuddle's a video learning platform, something like quizzes might not be a huge demand overall compared to the rest of the network, but for a teacher using it, having requests 7 times faster can make a huge difference in classroom management. Making things really fast is going to be important just to have a good experience in the classroom. And so that's what we mean by having a schools-focused cache, is our developers are constantly working to make sure that we can work with McGraw-Hill online textbooks, Apex Learning, which is a credit recovery program that high schools pay for, and so forth, Scholastic reading intervention programs. We want to make sure that we can cache this, and we've got developers working full-time at it, that just the competition isn't, because they're not really building just for schools. And again, just some more evidence from snapshots from some of these schools, Lakota schools in Ohio. And so what we need to know about start of lesson peaks is that's when a cache needs to be able to perform. So one of the competition elements that we encounter are just multifunction caching units, a Dell server that has a caching component and so forth. And if you really want to be able to get the performance that you're seeing, a multifunction server is going to fall down because it needs to work when demand is at its peak, right? It needs to, if I were to kind of escape out of here, when this is happening, right here, right? When this is happening right here, everything on your network is stressed to peak. The access points are doing its most, picking up the firewall and the filter, inspecting the most of the content. So if you want a multifunction server is going to deprioritize functions because it can't handle that peak load demand. It might perform okay during the small time, but we don't want a cache to work on the okay. We want a cache to cut our peaks. So multifunction servers are never going to be able to get the performance that schools need because they have such a high percentage of repeat requests compared to, say, enterprise workplaces. And so that's a big characteristic piece that a school cache needs, and why we can get the metrics that you've seen is because the unit isn't doing anything but caching, and so it can work during peak times. And so it needs to be easy to use and comprehensive and so forth. And there's some central management pieces. There's clustering. It's scalable to any school size or even as schools grow. And we can handle this bit of traffic that if any school puts any of these elements in their RFP, we would be the only one responding. We're the only cache that can do secured content inspection like YouTube, that can handle school-specific dynamic URLs or content delivery networks from schools, to do all the different ranges of software and video testing and online testing as well. So you can that's kind of the summary. And if you had to wrap it up, school peaks are bigger and they're highly cacheable because unlike enterprise, they're full of repeat requests. And this can save us money on bandwidth costs. This can spend us operational costs to have to do upgrades, whether it's locally or to our ISPs. And we're the only ones that can kind of deliver this way to a school because we're the only ones building just for schools. All right, so that should help. Hope it was informative. Send your questions our way.